You could send text back and forth. You could send HTML, hypertext markup language, back and forth. You could send JSON, JavaScript object notation back and forth. It doesn't need to actually be XML anymore. So it's kind of a misnamed, I guess, a misnamed technology, but that's why it's just sort of labeled Ajax and not really an acronym. But the purpose of Ajax, aside from that little caveat, is that we just want to be able to create better web applications. So let's think first about this traditional approach to web programming, and then that'll help us be a springboard into defining the difference to Ajax. Typically, as I've been saying, with a web approach, you would write, your client would get information from a user, package it up, send it over to a server, and while the server is playing with it, the client itself is sort of frozen. I'm sure some of you have used travel sites like Expedia, something like that, Travelocity, and I'm not sure if these have changed lately, but usually what happens is you make some sort of request and you sit and you wait and you wait and you wait, and your whole browser is kind of frozen. You can't do anything with the Expedia window anymore or the Travelocity window anymore while you're waiting for the server to process the requests. When the requests come back from the server, a new page is drawn with all your results of where you can fly to and how much flights cost. Now, the reason that's happening is that we're packaging up information to the server, and the server is sort of reconstructing all the data and the structure that's going to be sent back to the actual web browser itself. Maybe another way you could think about synchronous programming is I've got a little 2-year-old son, and he's not very good at catching balls right now. So we try to catch little volleyballs with him, or my wife and I, or some little beach balls. But let's say we're out playing in the yard and I interact with him synchronously. So I take a beach ball and I throw it to him. Upon me throwing the ball, I immediately freeze, and I can't do anything until my son gets that ball and throws it back to me. Now, if any of you have 2-year-olds or have had a 2-year-old, you'll know that it could take a long time for that kid to get the ball back to me, right? He could be running around. Chances are he's not going to catch it, so he could be running around to try to find that ball. And finally, he'll throw it back to me, and when he throws it back to me, I catch it, and then I'm kind of unstuck. I'm unfrozen. I can move around and play with the information and do what I want. But in that middle time, while I'm waiting for the server to come back, it's kind of an awkward experience, just sitting there being frozen. That's a bit contrived, but that's kind of like what it can be like interacting with a synchronous web application. As I put here, the user experience is disrupted as pages change. And the other thing is that JavaScript really plays little importance in the traditional approach. JavaScript might be used for some form validation or to maybe do a rollover or something like that, but to bring up an image or something, but it's hardly ever used, or it's not really used in its fullest form. So what this actually looks like drawn out, if we have a synchronous application, we have a client on top and a server underneath, and there's like a time arrow in between. And this client, we're saying that when we have user interactivity, then there's this data transmission, then the server plays with the data and then sends it back. That whole span in between that white part by the arrow where there's time is just frozen time with nothing for us to do. The way that Ajax sort of changes that up is that it gives us what Jesse James Garrett, he's sort of the person who coined the Ajax term. I got these pictures from adaptivepath.com. It's from a paper that he wrote that kind of coined Ajax. What he says and what Ajax tries to get at is that there's sort of this Ajax layer that is an abstraction layer, and we kind of abstract out this connectivity between the client and the server so that the user doesn't have to actually see what's going on, because the user doesn't care about that. All the user cares is that information comes back, and it comes back quickly. So in the Ajax approach, we're going to have, instead of a whole page refreshing, we're just going to have specific parts of a page refresh. And what's nice about that then is that we're only passing relevant data from the client to the server and back and forth. So again, I said this is going to cut down on your network load time because, as I said, with the traditional approach to programming, you have all the content and the data. So when you send information back, you have to send back all of the HTML, everything to redraw a page for the user. Whereas with Ajax, you could send something back. You might send back a lot of data if you are using XML and you have some big program that's generating a lot of XML, but you might just send something back as simple as a person's name, literally, their text of the person's name. My name Cameron. I might just send back the characters K-A-M-R-E-N, and that's it. Nothing else wrapped, nothing else from the server. And that is just a tiny fraction of data compared to what you'd actually have to do if I were to send back a whole PHP or JSP page that would rewrite my whole application to display my name on the top. And this Ajax approach kind of looks, if we look at this abstraction layer here, this is what we can see. Within the client, we have our browser user interface that's going on, but that's directly interacting with our Ajax. So we are continually sort of like going back and forth between the browser and the Ajax and drawing what's coming back. And the Ajax, you know, we're talking about, I mean, this is a representation, but the Ajax engine is going to be dealing and interacting with the actual server itself. So all the data transmission now, regardless of how long it takes, is going to be going back and forth. The Ajax engine is going to catch it, and the browser is never going to have to wait around for the server. The users aren't going to have to just sort of see nothing happening. Let's say, again, you do, now with Travelocity, you do a search for Hawaii flights, and it's going through its 20,000 flights that are possibilities. The user can interact with the other part of the website. If there are things they want to look at, maybe hotels, they can go ahead and browse on hotels while that request has been sent off. And when it comes back, part of the page can be redrawn that actually has the results. So it's not as if the web user, their experience is altered or hindered now, or there's no waiting. It just is updated automatically. Is that making sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions about that? We'll get into it a little bit more continuing. Okay. So just a little bit about the Ajax origins. Back in '96, Internet Explorer started using iframes, and they weren't actually doing Ajax then, but they were trying to bring this idea of refreshing part of a screen. Maybe some of you have used iframes if you have an Amazon store or have ever interacted with people's specific Amazon stores. And it's not the site itself, but embedded in other people's sites. Sometimes they use iframes to be able to draw what books are actually coming from Amazon. Now, typically people don't love to say that Internet Explorer is really advancing stuff, but hey, when it came to Ajax, they were really on the cutting edge. They were the ones who actually first introduced the XHR object, and they did that in Internet Explorer 5 back in 1999. And the XHR object is what handles the data transportation between the client and the server. That's what allows the user not to be bothered with this waiting for the server to come back. All right, it's a must-have for Ajax. And it wasn't until 2002 that Mozilla really popped an XHR object into their browser, in Mozilla 1. So really in 2002 is when we started seeing a lot of companies start using Ajax because there was more cross-browser support. So another just a little bit of information. I said Jesse James Garrett is the person who first coined this term Ajax, and it wasn't until like 2005 that he did that, so not too long ago, where he wrote a little paper and talked about what Ajax was. And Google Maps and Google Suggest really started some of the revolution of what could happen with this XHR object. We saw Google Maps, and I explained Google Suggest a little bit. It wasn't really until 2007 that the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, actually came up with like a draft specification for it. And the World Wide Web Consortium is a group that really aims to give direction to the Internet. So it's still pretty new.